1:58 p.m., the majestic, unforgiving north face of Howse Peak in the Canadian Rockies. Three tiny silhouettes roped together are carefully navigating their way down. Then, without warning, the silence is shattered. A sickening crack echoes like a gunshot. The summit cornice gives way, unleashing a white tidal wave that swallows the slope whole. The velocity is terrifying, over 100 kilometers per hour in the blink of an eye. Human reaction time is simply too slow for this kind of violence. In a split second, a standard technical descent transforms into an inescapable tomb. Trapped on that face are three of the absolute finest alpinists the world has ever known. They were called the Dream Team, men who made a career out of scaling the impossible, laughing in the face of gravity. Was this a tactical error, a momentary lapse in judgment regarding the snowpack? Or was it simply the mountain deciding it was time, a cruel stroke of luck that no amount of talent or preparation could possibly mitigate? This is the chronicle of David Lama, the wunderkind, who didn't just play the game of alpinism, he completely rewrote the rulebook. It is a story of brilliance, obsession, and the devastating reality that a single heartbeat can wipe away 28 years of a life lived on the razor's edge of human potential. Let's rewind to August of 1990. In a sterile maternity ward in Innsbruck, Austria, a child takes his first breath. No one in that room could have guessed that 2 decades later this infant would be hailed as the Lionel Messi of the climbing world. But his stadium wasn't a manicured grass pitch. It was the vertical frozen death zones 7,000 meters in the sky. David Lama, a name that would eventually force the old guard of the climbing community to tear up their manuals and start from scratch. His genetics were practically engineered for the mountains. His father was a Sherpa from Nepal, a lineage of people whose physiology has adapted over thousands of years to thrive in the thin, oxygen-deprived air of the Himalayas. While others gasped for breath, his lungs were just getting started. His mother was Tyrolean, hailing from the heart of the Austrian Alps. Tyrol isn't just a location on a map. It's the spiritual home of European mountaineering. It's a culture where children often learn to scramble up limestone faces before they can even recite the alphabet. It was as if nature decided to run a perfect experiment, combining the legendary endurance of the Himalayas with the precise technical mastery of the Alps. The result became clear in 1995. A 5-year-old David attends his very first climbing camp. It sounds like a standard childhood memory, parents trying to get their kid a hobby. But the supervisor that day wasn't some teenage summer camp volunteer. It was Peter Habeler, a living legend in the mountaineering world. This was the man who back in 1978, alongside Reinhold Messner, did what science said couldn't be done. They stood on the summit of Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen, proving the impossible was merely difficult. Doctors had practically guaranteed them brain damage or death, yet Habeler returned unscathed. And now this veteran of the death zone was standing there, watching a small boy navigate a rock wall. While the other children were clinging on for dear life, slipping and crying for their parents, David moved with an eerie grace like a lizard on a sun-drenched wall, fluid, deliberate, totally at home. Habeler saw something that day that a coach might see once in a lifetime, a complete absence of fear and a center of gravity that seemed hardwired into the boy's DNA. Habeler didn't wait. That very evening, he dialed David's parents. He was a man of the mountains, not given to small talk or hyperbole. The conversation was brief but heavy with destiny. "Your son," he began, "he is what I have spent my entire career looking for. The boy has a gift." Those words were the spark. Habeler wasn't just being polite. He had gazed into the future of the sport and saw David Lama staring back. His parents took the advice to heart. They entrusted the boy's development to Reinhold Scherer, the head coach at the legendary Innsbruck climbing gym. This was the moment the hobby became a vocation. Scherer was a drill sergeant of the highest order, obsessive, methodical, and strict. His goal wasn't just to churn out medal winners, he wanted to mold the psychology of a climber. He focused on flawless technique, iron discipline, and a deep, intuitive understanding of the stone. The regimen was brutal. David began training 6 days a week. While his classmates were kicking soccer balls or playing video games, he spent endless hours hanging from his fingertips on overhangs. He learned to visualize the route, solving the puzzle with his mind before his skin ever touched the rock. He was building more than just raw power. He was developing surgical precision and energy efficiency. Scherer recognized the same spark Habeler had seen, but he noticed something else, a psychological edge that was almost frightening. David didn't have the mental barriers that hold most of us back. When other kids looked at a wall and thought, "That's too steep," David simply thought, "How do I solve this?" That shift in perspective is the defining line between a good athlete and an immortal one. Fast forward to 1998. 8-year-old David Lama signs up for a junior competition. The judges saw a scrawny, unassuming kid and probably didn't think much of it. 2 hours later, those same judges were staring in open-mouthed disbelief. This child was effortlessly flashing routes that were shutting down teenagers twice his age. It wasn't just talent, it was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix. 2 years later, he did something that sent shockwaves through the entire climbing community. At 10 years old, David sent an A to route. To put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of a fourth grader walking into a university physics department and correcting the professor's calculus. Grown men spend decades training their tendons and minds to reach that grade. Lama simply skipped the learning curve and became the youngest human being on the planet to ever operate at that level. By 2004, David was 14. At a major Austrian competition, he strolled up to an 8A plus route, a beast of a climb, and on-sighted it. That means he climbed it on his very first try without any prior practice or beta. The judges actually had to double-check their scorecards to make sure they weren't seeing things. That kind of thing just doesn't happen. For that season and the next, Lama was unstoppable, winning basically every youth event he entered. The IFSC, the global governing body, suddenly had a crisis. Their rulebook explicitly banned juniors from the adult professional league. But David was so far ahead of the curve that the rules were actively hindering the sport's progression. The federation convened an emergency meeting and literally rewrote the regulations. They changed the law just for him. 2006, his first competition against the big dogs, a 15-year-old David stepped onto the mat and decimated the field, becoming the youngest person in history to hoist a climbing World Cup trophy. Veterans who had been training since before David was born were left in the dust by a teenager. In his debut season, he didn't just win, he claimed the European Championship title in 2 completely different disciplines simultaneously. He took gold in lead climbing and bouldering. In athletic terms, that's like winning the Olympic gold medal for the 100-meter sprint and the marathon in the same week. By 2008, at age 18, he was untouchable. He secured the overall World Cup title, the holy grail that the world's best spend their lives chasing. Lama snatched it away from rivals 10 to 15 years his senior. But during the award ceremony, the photographers caught a strange expression on his face. There was no screaming, no tears of joy, just calmness, almost indifference. David was already mentally checking out. To him, competition climbing was a video game he had already beaten. The plastic walls of the gym were no longer asking him any difficult questions. His true ambition lay beyond the safety of indoor arenas. He heard the call of the wild, the high mountains, a place where there are no scorecards, no applause, and no foam pads to catch you. A place where a single slip demands the ultimate price. By 2010, David Lama was the undisputed king of the climbing world, 20 years old, World Cup champion, conqueror of Europe. Sponsors were throwing contracts at him, desperate to be associated with his name. He had the money, the fame, the global recognition, everything a professional athlete is supposed to want. Yet precisely at this peak, Lama felt a profound emptiness. He went to a training session in Innsbruck, looked at the familiar plastic holds, and felt nothing. Reinhold Scherer, his lifelong mentor, sensed the shift immediately. David was moving with his usual robotic perfection, but the fire behind his eyes had been extinguished. After the session, they sat down to talk. Lama didn't mince words. The gym was dead to him. Competitions had become a boring routine. He was crushing routes that others deemed impossible, yet he felt zero emotional response. There was no fear, no true risk, no element of the unknown. It was just fun. And fun wasn't enough anymore. Scherer nodded. He understood. He had traveled that same road from athlete to alpinist. When sport climbing becomes a math equation, you already know the answer. To true climbers, seek out the chaos of nature, where plastic is replaced by crumbling granite, where the safety net is removed and beneath your feet lies nothing but the abyss. David began his migration to real rock. He headed to the Dolomites and the Alps, cutting his teeth on classic multi-pitch routes. The difference was visceral. The rock was alive, breathing, unpredictable. Every crack was a unique puzzle. The weather was a variable you couldn't control. There were no judges to impress, no cheering crowds, and absolutely no second chances. It was a binary world, you and the mountain. In 2011, Lama made a decision that left the sporting world reeling. At 21, in the absolute prime of his athletic career, he announced his retirement from competitive climbing. Officially, permanently. The pundits called it career suicide. Journalists wrote obituaries for his talent. His sponsors were sweating bullets. Their golden goose was walking away from the very stage that made him a star. But Lama wasn't quitting climbing. He was simply changing the battlefield to one that actually scared him. The transition began, and it was a slice of humble pie. The shift from gym rat to alpinist proved to be brutally difficult. They are different universes. In the gym, you are God. On the mountain, you are a guest. David had to go back to basics. He learned rope management for massive multi-pitch ascents. He mastered the delicate art of ice climbing. He studied avalanche safety weather patterns and the critical dynamic of trusting a partner with your life. He was a master becoming a student again. True mastery is a debt paid in sweat, and for a young athlete, time is the one currency that always runs short. In the high mountains, mistakes aren't learning opportunities, they are final verdicts. David Lama spent months grinding in the Alps, not just training, but transforming. He threw himself at legendary routes that hardened veterans used merely for warm-ups. It was a brutal ego check, humbling and exhausting. But it was mandatory. He had to harden his mind because the beast waiting for him was unlike anything in his trophy case, a goal that would overshadow every medal he had ever won. Flashback to 2009 in the wilds of Patagonia. David Lama stood at the foot of Cerro Torre, craning his neck back. Before him rose a 3,000-meter needle of granite, a terrifying spire stabbing straight into the heavens. This is a place where nature is hostile. Winds scream at 200 kilometers an hour and blue skies turn to lethal storms in the blink of an eye. It is arguably the most difficult summit on Earth to conquer. And David, he wanted to free climb the monster. That meant no ropes to haul him up, no metal ladders, just flesh on stone. But backing him was a massive corporate engine. Red Bull didn't just fund a trip, they launched an invasion. A full film crew helicopters and endless gear crates. The mission was to capture a blockbuster documentary about their Golden Boys ascent. The marketing gears were grinding at full speed. Lama was the poster child for the extreme sports world, and Cerro Torre was supposed to be nothing more than a dramatic stage for his performance. The team selected the infamous compressor route, a line steeped in bad blood. It was established by the Italian climber Cesare Maestri back in 1970. Maestri had dragged a gas-powered compressor up the wall, drilling bolts deep into the granite to force his way up. To this day, the climbing world argues over whether that climb was a heroic feat or a crime against nature. The film crew started their prep work, and that is precisely when they crossed a line that should never be crossed. To guarantee the safety of the cameramen, the production team rigged the mountain like a studio. They strung fixed ropes up the entire face and drilled dozens of fresh bolts, permanent metal anchors into the ancient rock. It made moving gear easy. It made the shoot safe. If you are making a movie, it was a logical production choice. But if you are a climber, it was an absolute disaster. Word of the drilling spread globally in a matter of days. The alpine community gasped in horror. To them, Cerro Torre is a cathedral, not a movie set. This is a peak reserved for the elite few who dare to tread there. And suddenly, a team with a massive corporate budget had arrived and turned the sacred route into a commercial theme park. Enter Rolando Garibaldi, Patagonia royalty, and a man whose soul is tethered to these jagged peaks. He decided to intervene personally. He climbed Cerro Torre, took out his tools, and systematically smashed the new bolts. Chop, chop, chop. You might call it vandalism. He considered it a rescue mission. Garibaldi went public with a scorching interview. He didn't mince words. He claimed Lama's crew was turning the serious, deadly pursuit of alpinism into a cheap circus act. He argued that permanently scarring the rock just to get a good camera angle was a commercial desecration of the wilderness. Cerro Torre isn't a Hollywood backlot. It is a killing ground, where people risk everything for the purity of the ascent. The climbing world rallied behind Garibaldi instantly. Online forums lit up with rage. Magazines printed scathing editorials. Almost overnight, David went from being the hero of the sport to the symbol of everything wrong with modern commercialized climbing. The tragedy was that David honestly didn't understand the fury. He came from the sanitized world of competition sport climbing, where bolts are just part of the furniture. In his world, route setters drill bolts to keep athletes safe and ensure a fair contest. He didn't see the issue with his team prioritizing safety. But high-altitude alpinism operates on a barbaric ancient code. Here, survival isn't the point, style is. It is not enough to simply reach the top. How you get there matters more than the summit itself. When you use machinery to drag the mountain down to your level, you erase the soul of the climb. Fast forward to January 2012. The narrative shifts. Two young Americans, Hayden Kennedy and Jason Crux, launch an assault on the mountain's southeast ridge. They are climbing in clean style. No artificial aids, no drilling, just using the natural features of the rock. It is a brutal slog that lasts for days, battling freezing storms and exhaustion. They are doing it the hard way, the right way, with total integrity. On their descent, Kennedy and Kruk make a decision that sends shockwaves through history. They pull out their tools and begin to erase the past. They start chopping Maestry's original bolts, systematically, one by one. Over 120 anchors, a literal ladder of iron that had stood for 40 years, vanished in a few hours. The Americans offered a simple, cold explanation for their actions. They argued that Maestry's bolts had neutered one of the world's fiercest peaks, turning it into a tourist trap. By removing them, they were returning Cerro Torre to its wild, natural state. They gave the mountain its teeth back. The reaction was explosive. Half the community called Kennedy and Crook saviors. The other half called them arrogant vandals. The arguments raged for weeks, but the noise didn't matter. The reality on the ground had shifted permanently. In the spring of 2012, fresh off the news of the chopping, David Lama and his partner, Peter Ortner, returned to Patagonia. It had been 3 years since the scandal of 2009. They had obsessed over this return. They had studied the route maps and planned their logistics, counting on the location of every single bolt for navigation and safety. And now, standing at the foot of the wall, the realization hits them like a hammer. The metal road is gone. The wall is blank. Ortner stares at David. The silence is heavy, and the unspoken question screams between them. What is the plan now? Do we pack up? Do we run? David stands stone still for a long time, staring up into the abyss. He turns to Ortner. His answer is short. We climb. Instantly, this stops being a sporting challenge and transforms into a raw fight for survival. Where there were once reliable steel bolts to clip into, there is now only smooth, hostile granite. The distance between safety points stretches out 15, maybe 20 meters of nothingness. Do the math, a slip in a section like that means a 40-meter plunge, or worse. Ortner takes the lead, hunting for tiny imperfections in the stone where he can jam temporary gear. He places cams and nuts metal wedges that rely purely on friction and hope. Every placement is a gamble. Every move is a calculated risk. Down below, Lama manages the rope, his knuckles white. If Ortner peels off the wall, David has to absorb the massive kinetic shock. The physics are terrifying. The longer the drop, the more violent the impact on the gear and the body. Catching a 20-meter whip is a task that shreds your nerves. They inch upward, fighting for centimeters. And naturally, Patagonia wakes up. The wind begins to howl. Visibility crashes to zero. At this altitude, time is your enemy. If you stop moving, you freeze. For the first time, the gym prodigy feels a cold knot in his stomach. It is terror, primal fear. And strangely, this is exactly what he came here to find. 2,000 meters in the air, Lama and Ortner have been battling the face of Cerro Torre for 20 hours straight. Their fingers are numb blocks of ice. Their bodies are running on fumes. Then the wall shuts the door. The crux. A sheer, vertical face of granite with no obvious holds. Ortner spots a few stray bolts the Americans missed. The temptation is overwhelming. They could use them to pull through the impossible section. They could step into a sling, cheat the move, and be done with the misery. David looks at the easy way out and shakes his head. Absolutely not. We free climb or we fall. Ortner understands. This isn't about the summit anymore. It is about redemption. If they use artificial aid now, the entire journey is a lie. David didn't return to this cursed mountain just to stand on top. He came to prove a point that a sport climber's technique could conquer the wildest alpine walls without drilling a single hole. David steps up to the crux. He scans the rock. Razor-thin edges, invisible divots in the stone. He rates the difficulty at 8A. He could climb that grade in his sleep when he was 14. But that was in a climate-controlled gym with a soft mat waiting below. This is 2 kilometers above the earth wind, screaming at 40 meters per second, and the mercury plunging to -10. His hands are losing all sensation. And there are no do-overs. A fall here means a 20-meter drop onto questionable gear that might rip right out of the wall. Lama begins his sequence. He trusts his life to friction and fingertips. Every muscle memory from years of training fires at once, but the margin for error is 0. 5 meters out, then 10, then 15. Ortner watches from below, knowing that if David falls now, catching him is nearly impossible. The rope sags with weight and distance. 20 meters of run out. David reaches for a final hold, pulls his body over the lip, and finds a ledge. He jams a piece of gear into a crack. He is safe. He finally exhales. The hardest section of the climb is history. Now it's just the grind. They push upward endlessly. Hour bleeds into hour. Pitch follows pitch. They aren't thinking anymore. Their bodies have taken over, moving on pure mechanical instinct and muscle memory. Their entire universe shrinks down to the immediate reality: grab this ledge, gain that meter, survive the next movement. It's a trance state. Finally, after a grueling 24-hour marathon of vertical punishment, David Lama and Peter Ortner pull themselves onto the peak of Cerro Torre. They had done the impossible, the southeast ridge free-climbed for the very first time. No bolts to pull on, no ladders, no cheating, just pure, unadulterated alpinism. It didn't take long for the word to get out. The shockwave tore through the global climbing community faster than a gale-force wind. Online message boards lit up immediately, but the tone had shifted completely. Gone was the hate. David Lama wasn't the corporate sellout anymore. Suddenly he was hailed as a pioneer. He had demonstrated that the explosive gymnastic style of sport climbing belonged on the world's biggest walls, provided you played by the rules and respected the mountain. Even Rolando Garibaldi, the fierce traditionalist who had famously chopped Lama's bolts years earlier, had to tip his cap. He penned a new piece. It was essentially a public apology and a stamp of approval. He admitted that Lama had just defined the future of the sport. It was the perfect marriage of supreme technical ability and profound reverence for the alpine environment. Fast forward to 2012. With the Patagonia chapter closed and his point proven on the big walls, Lama wasn't content to rest. He turned his gaze toward a map of Asia, wondering just how far he could push the envelope. He focused on the Karakoram Range in Pakistan. This is a land of giants, where the average summit towers above 6,000 meters. It's a place where oxygen is a luxury, breathing is a chore, and the mercury regularly plunges to a bone-shattering 30 degrees below zero. Here, the vertical relief is unrivaled. The walls are sheerer and loom larger than anything else on the planet. Lama locked onto a specific target, Trango Tower, also known as the Nameless Tower. It's a granite fang piercing the sky at 6,000 meters, boasting a vertical face that drops a full kilometer straight down. He aimed for the legendary Eternal Flame route, a line first established back in 1989. The grade sits at 7C+. To put that in perspective, that is an incredibly hard climb at a comfortable altitude with plenty of air. Now imagine doing that at 6,000 meters. The moves are technically identical to what you'd do in a training gym, but the physical cost is astronomical. Every reach and pull demands double the energy. His lungs were on fire and his muscles screamed for oxygen that simply wasn't there. Motor skills start to degrade, coordination slips, and the stakes are life or death. A fall here is a plunge into the void. Yet he pulled it off. Conquering Trango was a revelation. It proved to Lama that high-end sport climbing wasn't just for low altitudes. He could take those gymnastics to the roof of the world. This was uncharted territory. Nobody had applied that level of difficulty to that altitude before. Hungry for more, he picked his next opponent, Chogolisa. Standing at 7,665 meters, it lacks the fame of an 8,000er. He says, but the mountain doesn't care about arbitrary numbers. At that height, you are deep in the biological danger zone where the body begins to consume itself. But Lama didn't just want to stand on top. He wanted to click into bindings and ski back down. He planned a freeride descent from a height where most people struggle to put one foot in front of the other. The expedition launched in September of 2013, and the mountain greeted them with immediate hostility. It was a whiteout nightmare. Of the 18 days they spent on the slopes, it snowed for 14 of them. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and the wind was strong enough to bowl a man over. They spent days trapped in nylon tents playing the waiting game. Up there, patience isn't just a character trait, it's a survival skill. If you get impatient and try to force the mountain's hand at that altitude, the outcome is usually fatal. You simply don't return. Finally, on the 15th day, the clouds parted just enough. Lama and his crew launched their summit bid. It was a slow, agonizing grind that lasted for hours, with every single step turning into a war against oxygen deprivation. Every fiber of your being pleads for rest. Your brain screams at you to turn around and descend. Lama ignored the biological alarms and pushed through to the peak. Then came the real challenge, skiing down from 7,500 meters. The terrain was terrifyingly steep, the snowpack was a ticking time bomb, and the fog was closing in. Catching an edge meant triggering a slide that would bury you instantly. Yet Lama carved it perfectly. The freeride skills honed in the Alps translated seamlessly to the Himalayas. Standing at the bottom, he had an epiphany. He realized that the barrier between high-altitude suffering and high technical difficulty was an illusion. They could be fused together. By 2014, he was obsessed with a new photo. It was Masherbrum, a beast rising to 7,821 meters. Specifically, he was looking at the northeast face. It's a vertical nightmare known in the community as the Wall of Shadows. Many elite teams had thrown themselves at it. All had failed. Trying to explain the scale to his friends, Lama used an analogy. Imagine the Eiger north face, the most notorious wall in the Alps. Now take Cerro Torre and stack it directly on top of the Eiger, that monstrosity that is Masherbrum. July 2014. They arrived at base camp. It was a power trio: David Lama, Hansjörg Auer, and Peter Ortner. These were three of the absolute best alpinists of their generation, standing small beneath the looming shadow of the northeast face. Above them sat a full kilometer of mixed horrors, ice, snow, and rock, starting where most mountains end. Auer was already a myth in his own time, a solo specialist known for speed-running routes that took normal teams days to complete. Then there was Ortner, the rock-solid partner from the Cerro Torre triumph, and a brother in arms. The consensus was clear. If this wall was climbable, this was the squad to do it. They began at first light. Initially, it felt good. The ice was crisp, and the safety gear held firm. But the optimism evaporated within 60 minutes. They realized rapidly that this wasn't like their days in Patagonia. This was a different beast entirely. The base of the wall was a shooting gallery. Massive avalanches raked the face on a clockwork schedule, crashing down every 20 minutes. We're talking tons of debris plummeting from the heavens with a roar that sounded like artillery fire. When they hit, the world went white. The concussive blast alone was strong enough to rip a climber off the wall. Auer later described it as playing Russian roulette. You're clinging to the ice utterly blind, wondering if the chamber is loaded for you in the next 60 seconds. Skill became irrelevant. It was pure chance. You just kept swinging your axes and praying. It took them 6 nerve-shredding hours to navigate that lower kill zone with death hovering over their shoulders every single minute. Death missed them by inches over and over again. At one terrible moment, Ortner was clipped by the flank of a slide. The impact tore him from his foothold, leaving his life hanging on the integrity of a single rope. The gear held. He swung there, coughing ice out of his lungs, shook it off, and resumed the ascent. But escaping the avalanche zone only led them to a new nightmare, the technical rock face. The rock was graded at 7B, spiking up to 8A in places. That is elite-level difficulty in a comfortable climbing gym. Trying to pull those moves at 7,000 meters is bordering on physical impossibility. Lama took the lead on the hardest pitch. His body revolted, his fingers were clumsy, his coordination vanished, and the intense focus required for such technical moves was gone. Starved of oxygen, his brain was firing at maybe 30% capacity. Hypoxia was winning. He whipped off the wall. The rope went tight. He shook out and tried again. Another fall, then a third and a fourth. It hit him hard. He hadn't lost his skill, but the altitude had stolen his ability to use it. We simply aren't designed to perform gymnastics in the stratosphere. They had managed to scrape their way up 400 meters of the kilometer-high face before they were forced to stop. They set up a bivouac for the night, if you can call it that. Sleeping was a cruel joke. The temperature plummeted to minus 25, and the wind howled like a jet engine, battering them at 50 meters per second. No one slept. They just huddled in the dark, shivering and praying for the sun to return. When dawn finally broke, Lama gathered the team. He didn't panic, but his assessment was brutally honest. Under these conditions, the wall wasn't just hard, it was unclimbable. Going up wasn't bravery anymore, it was a suicide pact. They made the call to bail. It was a choice that displayed a wisdom often missing in young alpinists. Up there, the line between being a hero and being a fool is razor thin. True courage is risking it all when the odds are at least slightly in your favor. Stupidity is pushing forward when death is a certainty. Lama chose to live. Masherbrum beat them that day, but they all walked away breathing. And in the world of high-stakes alpinism, coming home alive is the only victory that matters. 2016. The scene shifts to Nepal. Lama is fixated on Annapurna 3, a 7,555-meter giant. He's looking at the southeast ridge, a notorious line that has repelled every suitor for decades. For 35 years, nobody had even dared to launch a serious expedition. It wasn't just the climb, it was getting there. The approach trek navigates straight through a volatile active landslide zone. Back in 2012, that path claimed the lives of several porters. The mountainsides are unstable, sending tons of rock crashing down without a whisper of warning. Walking to base camp isn't hiking, it's playing a lottery where the prize is getting crushed. Lama decided to break the rules. He chartered a helicopter to bypass the death trap and fly directly to base camp. It cost a fortune, but the real price was his reputation. Purists in the community view helicopters as cheating, a major breach of alpine ethics. David Lama, however, looks at the problem through a completely different lens. He asks a fundamental question: why gamble with your life on the approach if the prize at the end doesn't justify the danger? To bypass the treacherous lower slopes, a helicopter drops the team directly at the base of the ridge. The real work, the actual climb, starts now. Almost immediately within the first vertical stretch, the grim reality sets in. This isn't the solid granite of Cerro Torre, and it certainly isn't the clean lines of Trongo. They have stepped into a nightmare scenario. The mountain is literally falling apart, the rock shattered by eons of frost weathering. Every time they reach for a grip, the mountain fights back. What appeared to be bomb-proof granite in the reconnaissance photos turns out to be loose, choss garbage rock that disintegrates into gravel the moment you touch it. Trust is impossible here. Every single piece of safety gear they place is suspect. You hammer a piton into a crack and it just rattles around loosely. You try to slot a camming device and the rock expands and crumbles around it. For 3 agonizing days, the team fights their way up the ridge, but they are crawling. Sections that would typically take an experienced climber 60 minutes are eating up 4 hours of grueling labor. The delay is caused by the rock quality. They are forced to use slow artificial aid techniques on sections they had confidently planned to free climb. They are currently sitting at 6,500 meters, gazing up at another vertical kilometer of technical terrain standing between them and the summit. Their pace, however, reveals a brutal truth they can't ignore. Moving this slowly, they are still a full week away from the top. They simply don't have enough food or stove fuel to survive that long. But the final nail in the coffin is the sky. The weather is collapsing. Winter in the Himalayas is a cruel judge that offers zero forgiveness for miscalculations. The mercury crashes violently, dropping to minus 35 degrees Celsius. The wind screams across the face, gusting up to 100 kilometers an hour. In conditions this extreme, exposed skin freezes instantly. Life-altering frostbite is a threat that can strike in mere minutes. Huddled inside their tent, listening to the gale threaten to rip their shelter from the wall, the team comes to a silent consensus. The window of opportunity has slammed shut. Lama makes the hard call to retreat. For the second time in just 2 years, he is forced to walk away from one of the world's great unclimbed faces. Yet Lama refuses to view this as a failure. To him, it is a cold, rational calculation of survival. In a post-expedition interview, his assessment sounds final, like a court verdict. He declares the southeast ridge of Annapurna 3 to be hovering right at the bleeding edge of what is humanly possible. He describes it as technically more demanding than the infamous Cerro Torre, sitting at an altitude higher than Masherbrum and composed of the worst quality rock imaginable. Perhaps decades from now, a visionary might unlock this route, but it will demand a miraculous alignment of perfect weather, superhuman fitness, and blind luck. In the high mountains, finding those 3 factors together is almost unheard of. Then in 2015, back in Innsbruck, David Lama's phone rings. On the other end of the line is none other than Konrad Anker. For a climber of Lama's generation, this phone call is the equivalent of a rookie basketball player being invited to play a one-on-one game with Michael Jordan. Anker is mountaineering royalty, a living legend, best known for discovering George Mallory's body on Mount Everest back in 1999. Anker has dozens of first ascents under his belt. Despite being 52 years old, his cardio and strength put most 30-year-old athletes to shame. He proposes a partnership to Lama, the target Luna Gri, a stunning peak rising 6,907 meters into the sky. Located in Nepal, the mountain's west face presents a vertical kilometer of complex mixed climbing, a chaotic blend of ice, snow, and rock. It is relentless, technical, and dangerous. Most importantly, the true summit has never been touched by human hands. Others had tried, all had been beaten back. To Anker, Lama represents the ideal partner. He brings the explosive power of youth, unmatched technical skill, and endurance. Conversely, Lama sees in Anker exactly what he needs to learn decades of wisdom on big Himalayan walls and tactical brilliance. They launched their first assault in 2015. The pair spends several grueling days wrestling with the face. The terrain proves to be far more hostile than their research suggested. The mixed sections where rock and ice meet are not just difficult, they are nightmarish. They find themselves pulling moves rated M6 extremely difficult dry tooling, usually reserved for crags, but they are doing it near 7,000 meters, where the air is thin and the lungs burn, the ice is rotten, and the rock is glazed with verglas. Every anchor they build feels sketchy. Then, at 6,000 meters, the weather turns against them. The clouds descend, dropping visibility to absolute zero. Anchor, relying on his years of survival instincts, decides it is time to bail. Lama nods in agreement. In the death zone, the gut feeling of a senior partner outweighs any youthful ambition to push forward. Fast forward to 2016. The duo returns for a second attempt. This time they are dialed in. They have memorized the route's intricacies, refined their logistical tactics, and the forecast promises a stable weather window. They attack the wall with renewed confidence, moving efficiently up to 6,000 meters. Anchor is on the sharp end of the rope, leading the pitch, while Lama manages the belay from a stance below. Suddenly, Conrad freezes. The rhythm of his breathing shatters. He grabs at his chest, gasping. A heart attack. He is having a massive cardiac event while hanging off a vertical face at 6,000 meters. Lama's reaction is immediate and professional. There is no panic in his eyes, only cold, calculated action. He locks off the rope, securing anchor, and instantly transitions into rescue mode. Every passing second bleeds away survival chances. At this extreme altitude, a heart attack is usually a guaranteed fatality unless the victim loses elevation immediately. The descent is a race against time. Lama performs the physical labor of two men. He builds anchors, lowers anchor's dead weight, rappels down, pulls the ropes, and sets up the next station. Conrad is conscious but fading fast, too weak to help. He knows with absolute certainty that without David, he is a dead man. They finally drag themselves into base camp. The SOS goes out. Agonizing hours later, the thump of rotor blades cuts the air. A helicopter touches down and Anchor is evacuated to Kathmandu. The doctors confirm the fears he suffered a massive heart attack. Had they stayed on that wall for even one more hour, the outcome would have been tragic. Now Lama stands alone at base camp. He looks up. The weather window is perfectly clear. The mountain is still inviting him. Technically, he has the gear to try for a solo ascent. He could go up alone without a partner, without a safety net. He stares at the looming wall for hours, wrestling with the temptation. Finally, the answer clarifies in his mind. No, Lunagri is a team route. To climb it solo now would be more than just risky. It would feel like a betrayal of the partnership and a sign of disrespect to the mountain and the near tragedy that just occurred. Later, from his hospital bed, Anchor gives a candid interview. He admits that his days on routes of this caliber are over. His heart gave him a warning he cannot ignore. At 53, the human body has limits, and it will no longer tolerate the crushing strain of high-altitude alpinism. It marks the end of an era for a legend. But for David Lama, the story is far from over. Lunagri remains unfinished business. In October 2018, David Lama returns to the Himalayas, standing once again at the foot of the giant that defeated them. 2 years have evaporated since the terrifying incident with Anchor. For 2 years, this wall has haunted his thoughts. Now he makes a decision that most in the climbing community would classify as suicidal madness. He is going up, and he is going absolutely alone. A solo ascent of a nearly 7,000-meter peak involving complex mixed climbing is the stuff of coffee shop theory, not reality. Usually these attempts end in an obituary. However, Lama is not free soloing, he is not climbing without a rope. He employs a lonely, exhausting system known as rope solo. The concept is straightforward, but the physical toll is immense. You climb a pitch, fix the rope to an anchor rappel all the way back down to retrieve your gear, and then climb the same stretch of rock a second time using mechanical ascenders. Essentially, to climb the mountain once he has to physically cover the distance 3 times. A vertical kilometer becomes 3 kilometers of vertical gain. Doing this at sea level is exhausting. Doing it in the death zone at 7,000 meters is pure torture. Lama begins his crusade at dawn. The first few hours are a rhythmic grind. Climb, anchor, rappel. Clean, jug up. Repeat. His muscles move on muscle memory, seemingly detached from his brain. His mind narrows its focus to the microscopic details, the integrity of the anchor, the rope tension, the next hold. As night falls, the temperature plunges to minus 30 degrees. The wind howls, battering the face at 80 kilometers an hour. Lama carves out a tiny bivvy, a precarious ledge barely wide enough to sit on. He sets up his small tent, but the wind threatens to shred it. It offers almost no insulation. Inside, it is just as freezing as the void outside. Dawn breaks on day 2. Lama inspects his feet. He can't feel his toes. It is the early stage of frostbite. In any rational scenario, this is the red flag to retreat. but Lama buries the doubt and pushes upward. He is driven by a singular realization: if he turns back now, he will never return. He cannot go through this again. The second day dissolves into a haze of agony and exhaustion. Every reach requires a conscious command from his brain. His body screams for rest. His will forces it to move. Day 3, October 25th. Lama confronts the head wall. This is the final barrier, the last 100 meters guarding the summit. It involves M6 mixed climbing a delicate dance on ice-glazed rock. This is the crux, the hardest part of the entire route. He must navigate it alone, with zero backup running on fumes and climbing on feet he can no longer feel. He moves with agonizing slowness. He tests every single handhold twice before committing his weight. He places every piece of protection with the obsessive precision of a neurosurgeon. One slip, one popped cam, and it is all over. After 3 hours of intense focus, he pulls over the lip. He is standing on the summit of Lunagri. He is the first human being to ever see this view. The Virgin Peak has finally been conquered. The ambitious project that began with Konrad Anker 3 years prior is finally closed. Lama allows himself just 10 minutes on the summit to soak it in and snap a few photographs. Then he immediately begins the descent, knowing well that in mountaineering, the summit is merely the halfway point of survival. In 2019, Lama is posthumously awarded the Piolet d'Or, the Golden Ice Axe, the sport's highest honor. The judges describe his solo of Lunagri as a masterpiece of modern alpine style. It combined extreme technical difficulty, high altitude, the solitude of a solo ascent, and an ethically clean approach. These elements fuse together to create a climb that has achieved legendary status. In April 2019 in Innsbruck, David Lama meets up with fellow elite climbers Hansjörg Auer and Jess Roskelley for a new objective. In the high-stakes universe of professional climbing, mentioning these three names together sounded less like a team roster and more like the lineup for a superhero movie. First you had Hansjörg Auer, a man renowned for his terrifyingly fast solo ascents, capable of devouring a route in a single afternoon that would take competent alpinists an entire week to conquer. Then there was Jess Roskelley, the heir to American climbing royalty. His father and grandfather hadn't just climbed the Himalayas, they had defined the golden age of mountaineering there. Rounding out the trio was David Lama, the surgical technician of the group, a prodigy whose resume included legendary feats on the impossible spires of Cerro Torre and Lunagri. When these three joined forces, the outdoor press immediately branded them the dream team, and for good reason. The logic was simple and undeniable. If this specific combination of talent, genetics, and experience couldn't climb a mountain, then the mountain simply defied the laws of physics. Their crosshairs were trained on the Canadian Rockies, specifically the rugged, unforgiving wilderness of Banff in the province of Alberta. This region is infamous for a notoriously short window for mixed climbing, and by the time April rolls around, you are looking at the absolute final days before the spring thaw turns the great faces into death traps. The trio touches down in Canada as the month begins, knowing they are racing against the thermometer. Their immediate priority is acclimatization, even though the Canadian peaks don't scrape the stratosphere like the Himalayas. Shocking the lungs with a sudden jump in elevation without preparation is a rookie mistake that can end an expedition before it starts. Physiology demands respect, so they need to give their bodies time to adjust to the thin air. They select the Andromeda Strain as their testing ground, a regional classic offering 900 meters of gnarly ice and mixed rock, perfectly suited to wake up their muscles and sharpen their minds. They obliterate the route in a single day, moving with a synergy that usually takes years to develop. The ascent is clean, the speed is blistering, and the partnership is locked in. With the warm-up complete, eyes turn to the true monster waiting for them, the east face of Howse Peak. This is a beast of a mountain boasting 1,000 meters of unrelenting vertical ice. The route carries a dark reputation in the climbing community, known primarily for two terrifying characteristics: its extreme technical difficulty and its lethal susceptibility to avalanches. The geography of the face creates a natural trap. It sits nestled inside a massive couloir that acts as a funnel for falling debris. Speed here isn't just about athletic performance, it is a survival mechanism. Every second spent on that wall increases the statistical probability of being swept into the void. For several days, Lama, Auer, and Roskelley obsess over the mountain, scanning the wall with binoculars to engineer their path. They settle on an audacious plan. They intend to link two historic routes, M16 and the King Line, fusing them into one continuous grueling push to the top. This strategy would effectively forge a brand new direct line up the mountain, significantly raising the stakes. M16 is rated WI6, a grade that signifies vertical, precarious ice with virtually no natural protection. The King Line is even more punishing, a high-grade mixed climb requiring mastery of both rock and ice. Combining these two monsters creates a challenge that the vast majority of elite climbers wouldn't even dream of attempting. The team breaks down their tactics, agreeing that velocity is their best defense. The faster they can punch through the danger zones, the less likely they are to be caught by the mountain's shifting moods. Their strategy hinges on a nocturnal assault, starting the climb under the cover of darkness when freezing temperatures glue the loose rock and ice together. The goal is to blast through the most hazardous sections before noon, anticipating the moment the sun swings around to bake the slopes and release the avalanches. The calendar hits April 16th, and the mountains offer a rare gift: stability. The mercury sits at a crisp -15 degrees, and the air is dead calm, a flawless meteorological window. The team goes through the ritual of gear prep, inspecting every millimeter of rope, sharpening ice tools, and organizing belay devices. In this game, a single overlooked detail can be the difference between a story for the grandkids and an obituary. By evening, they drive out to the base of the massif, planning to snatch a few hours of restless sleep before waking for a 2 o'clock alpine start. They intend to navigate the initial labyrinth in pitch blackness, trusting their headlamps to guide them, with a hard goal of clearing the bottom third of the face before the first rays of dawn. As they settle in, Roskelley cracks a joke about taking a solid month off to relax once they get this beast behind them. Auer nods in agreement, already thinking about the rest, but Lama remains quiet. This is his trademark state. Before a big ascent, he withdraws into a zone of absolute laser-focused silence. It is April 16th, 2019. At 5:51 in the morning, the temperature has dropped to -18 degrees. 3 solitary figures crawl out of their bivouac at the foot of the imposing east face. Their headlamps cut distinct beams through the pre-dawn gloom, and the only sound is the sharp crunch of crampons biting into frozen snow. The waiting is over. The climb has officially begun. The opening hours are defined by finding a flow state. Auer takes the sharp end of the rope for the lower pitches, demonstrating why he is a legend. His technique is mesmerizing to watch. His axes don't just hit the ice, they seem to merge with it, driven by surgical precision. He finds stability on surface features that look completely unclimbable to the untrained eye. Behind him, Roskelley and Lama move in perfect unison, the rope pulled tight like a telegraph wire, transmitting their collective intent. Their movement is fluid, efficient, and rapid. By 8:36 in the morning, the sun begins to bleed into the sky. It is Lama's turn to take the lead on the crux pitch, the hardest section of the climb. He is staring down vertical ice-graded WI6+, which essentially means climbing a 90-degree pillar of brittle, shattering glass with zero margin for error. At this grade, you can't just brute force your way up. Every swing of the axe is a high-stakes gamble. Swing too hard, and you shatter the structure. Swing too soft, and you plummet. Lama dissects the problem methodically, gaining elevation inch by painstaking inch. Below him, Roskelley manages the safety rope and captures the moment on camera. The footage reveals David's terrifying level of focus. There are no wasted calories, no hesitation, only the absolute necessity of movement. This is the culmination of decades spent on the sharp end of a rope. He unlocks the puzzle in 40 minutes, securing the line for the others. Roskelley and Auer ascend quickly behind him. They check their watches. The pace is aggressive. They are perfectly on schedule to tag the summit by midday. So far, the mountain is letting them pass. At 11:02 in the morning, the terrain shifts and Roskelley takes the lead on the ridge. Here, the pure ice vanishes, replaced by frost-shattered rock. It demands a constant mental switch, hooking ice tools on granite edges 1 second, then jamming gloves into cracks the next. The technical grade here is M7, a serious difficulty rating. But Jess moves with the confidence of someone born into this world. Climbing loose, dangerous routes isn't just a hobby for him. It's a genetic inheritance spanning 3 generations. The team is flying now. In fact, they are moving faster than their optimistic projections. This is the best possible scenario. Minimizing exposure time reduces the objective hazard. The weather remains stoic, windless, and clear. The temperature is creeping up, but it hasn't yet reached the danger zone. The clock strikes 12:44 in the afternoon. They run out of mountain. They have reached the summit of Howse Peak. Standing at an elevation of 3,295 meters, Lama, Auer, and Roskelley are the highest humans in the range. They have done the impossible. A new futuristic line has been established on one of the most feared faces in the Rockies. The theoretical link-up of M16 and the King line is now a physical reality. Roskelley fishes out his smartphone for the obligatory summit selfie. The photo captures the three of them huddled together, faces drawn with exhaustion, but their smiles are authentic and beaming. Auer has thrown a brotherly arm around Lama's shoulders, while Roskelley flashes a triumphant thumbs up. They allow themselves 15 minutes to soak in the victory, hydrating and forcing down energy bars. They need to recharge quickly for the descent. Every alpinist knows the old adage, the summit is only the halfway point. Descending is statistically far more lethal than climbing up. Fatigue dulls the reflexes, and the adrenaline crash can lead to fatal lapses in concentration. This is the zone where mistakes hunt you down. At 1:27 in the afternoon, the final photograph is taken. Lama inspects the ropes for the rappel. Auer builds the anchor station, and Roskelley stows his camera gear. The celebration is over. The work begins again. They opt to descend via the north face, which is the standard exit route for climbers on this peak. Conditions remain favorable. Visibility stretches for miles, and the slopes below appear solid and untouched. There is absolutely no warning sign of the horror to come. To them, this is just a routine commute home after a successful day at the office. It is a procedure they have executed hundreds of times in ranges all over the world. At 1:40 in the afternoon, the team drops into the North Couloir. It is a standard rappel operation. Auer descends first, sliding down the ropes. Lama follows him. Roskelley remains at the top, managing the anchor system. From their vantage point, the snowpack looks coherent and safe. The snow feels dense underfoot, and the ambient temperature hasn't spiked enough to raise alarm bells. Everything is proceeding strictly by the book. It is a textbook technical descent indistinguishable from countless others they have survived. Far below on the asphalt ribbon of the Icefields Parkway, a traveler spots the majestic peak and pulls his car over. He grabs his camera, framing Howse Peak against the brilliant blue sky, hoping for the perfect shot for his social media feed. He zooms his lens toward the face. Through the viewfinder, the photographer's eye catches a sudden violent flicker of motion. The massive summit cornice, a heavy overhanging shelf of wind-packed snow, suddenly shears off. Tons of ice and snow detach from the ridgeline and begin a terrifying freefall. The tourist keeps the shutter open, unaware that he is documenting the opening seconds of a tragedy. The cornice slams into the slope below with the force of a bomb. The impact is catastrophic, instantly triggering a chain reaction across the entire face. The snowpack, which had supported the climbers moments ago, instantly liquefies. A Class 3 avalanche is born, a colossal churning river of white death, mixing ice, snow, and boulders, accelerating to speeds exceeding 100 kilometers an hour. Do not mistake a Class 3 avalanche for the gentle powder clouds you see in ski movies. This is a solid moving wall, meters high, and possessing the density of wet concrete. The crushing pressure inside the slide can reach several tons per square meter. For a human caught inside, there is no swimming, no breathing, and no fighting back. You are simply debris swept along like a twig in a tsunami. The tourist's photograph captures a massive white cloud swallowing the upper section of the couloir. Where a calm slope existed a second ago, there is now only a chaotic white void. Lama, Auer, and Roskelley are directly in the barrel of the gun. They have zero time to react. The avalanche engulfs them, instantly snapping their ropes like thread. Their bodies are torn from the wall and swept away, dragged violently over jagged rocks and ice cliffs. They fall hundreds of vertical meters in seconds. The avalanche eventually settles in the lower bowl, leaving only a deafening silence in its wake. A delicate powder of snow hangs suspended in the frigid air, drifting slowly to the ground. Down on the highway, a tourist frames up a shot, clicking the shutter on what looks like a perfect winter postcard. He has no idea that his lens has just captured the final resting place of three of the world's greatest alpinists. Unaware of the tragedy hidden in the frame, he posts the image online, tagging it with hashtags about nature's majesty. Meanwhile, evening settles in. Jess Roskelley, a titan of mountaineering himself, and Jess's father, sits by the phone. He is waiting for the check-in that signifies safety. They had a protocol. Jess wasn't just a climber, he was a professional. If he said 6 o'clock, the phone rang at 6 o'clock sharp, but 6 comes and goes. Silence. 7 o'clock. Nothing but static. By 8, the pit in John's stomach is growing. He knows the rhythm of the mountains, and this silence is deafening. Panic begins to set in. John contacts the park coordinator and confirms the group summited earlier that morning. They should have been celebrating at base camp hours ago. By 9 p.m., Jess Roskelley knows something is wrong. He pulls the trigger and officially raises the alarm. Search and rescue teams mobilize immediately, but the mountain imposes its own curfew. Scouring those peaks in the pitch black is a suicide mission. It is futile and deadly. The birds have to wait for first light. April 17th breaks with a cold, gray dawn. 2 Parks Canada choppers lift off from Banff, the rotors slicing through the thin air. Inside are men who have spent decades reading these peaks experts who know the difference between a shadow and a tragedy. These pilots could fly this terrain blindfolded, but nothing prepares them for the sight awaiting them on the north face of Howse Peak. As they bank around the mountain, the devastation is undeniable. The aftermath is brutally clear. The couloir hasn't just been swept, it has been scrubbed clean. A massive avalanche has scoured the face, leaving a chaotic mix of snow ice blocks and shattered rock. And then the telltale signs of humanity, bright flashes of color against the monochromatic white. Fragments of climbing gear. They spot the tragic debris, a tangled rope, a lonely backpack, a solitary ice tool. A rescuer keying his mic relays the coordinates to base. His tone is flat, controlled, and utterly professional, but the subtext is heartbreaking. Everyone listening knows what the debris field means. This isn't a rescue operation anymore. There is zero chance anyone survived that slide. It is now a body recovery. But the mountain isn't done yet. The winds begin to howl and visibility drops to near zero. To put boots on the ground in these conditions would be to sentence the rescue team to death. The operation commander makes the hard call abort. They have to pull back and wait for a weather window. For the next 3 agonizing days, the Rockies refuse to cooperate. It is a whiteout of snow gale force, winds, and low ceilings. The birds stay grounded. Meanwhile, Jess Roskelley is trapped in a hotel room pacing the floor. Every tick of the clock feels like a lifetime. Intellectually, he knows Jess is gone, but the heart is stubborn. Without a body, the loss remains abstract, a nightmare he can't wake up from. Finally, on April 21st, the clouds part just enough. The helicopter surges back up toward Howse Peak. Rescuers hover and drop onto the edge of the avalanche runout. They start the grim sweep. It doesn't take long. They locate David Lama and Jess Roskelley first. Tragically, they are still tied into the rope together. They are found in the lower section of the cirque, entombed where the massive slide finally lost its momentum. The bodies are partially submerged in the hard-packed snow. The team works with respectful efficiency, documenting the exact locations and preparing them for the airlift. Hansjörg Auer is discovered separately, roughly 50 meters further up the slope. That distance tells a story. It suggests that when the mountain let go, he was positioned differently from the other 2. Perhaps Auer was managing the ropes at an anchor or down climbing solo while the others rigged the next rappel, but then a rescuer spots a crucial piece of evidence on Roskelley's ice tool. It is a friction hitch, a specific knot used to back up a rappel device, and it is tied perfectly. This is a vital clue. It confirms that at the exact moment of impact, the team was in the middle of a controlled technical descent. They were not being reckless. They were doing everything by the book, following every safety protocol to the letter. This wasn't a slip, a missed clip, or a bad decision. It was an objective hazard, the terrifying unpredictability of the mountains. A cornice collapse is a silent killer you cannot foresee. No amount of Olympic-level skill or decades of experience can save you when thousands of tons of snow decide to drop from the sky. It wasn't climber error. It was simply the mountain taking them. The bodies are long-lined out to the valley floor. Now comes the cold bureaucracy of death, formal identification, filing the paperwork, and the devastating calls to the families. The rescue team compiles their final incident report, and their conclusion is stark and simple. The team was operating within all reasonable safety parameters. The cause of death was an act of God, an unforeseen cornice failure that triggered a massive slide. As the news breaks, the global climbing community erupts into debate. Forums light up, articles are written, and everyone asks the same haunting question. Could this have been prevented? The answer is a frustratingly complex shade of gray. Technically, number cornices break without warning. The weather reports were stable, and their timing was standard. Some critics point to the calendar, arguing that April is late season when the snowpack rots and becomes a ticking time bomb. But any local will tell you that April is prime time for the Canadian Rockies. Countless teams bag peaks during this window every year without a scratch. It was just bad luck. The news of losing Lama, Auer, and Roskelley circles the globe in a matter of hours. The shock is palpable. We didn't just lose climbers, we lost 3 icons. Social media becomes a digital wake, overflowing with tributes to the fallen kings. A single avalanche wiped out a generation of talent. It feels like the end of an era. But when the snow settles, what does a man actually leave behind, besides a list of summits? In his short 28 years, David Lama achieved what many thought impossible. He took the gymnastic fluid grace of 8A sport climbing and transported it into the death zone above 7,000 meters. He proved that the delicate precision of an indoor competitor could survive on the world's most hostile walls. He didn't just climb, he evolved the sport. His personal journey was unique, transforming from a teenage wunderkind, crushing plastic holds in competitions, to a seasoned alpinist with the wisdom to retreat on Masherbrum. It was a complete coming-of-age story compressed into a decade and a half. Lama left us with films, but not the usual adrenaline-soaked sizzle reels covered in logos. His storytelling was different. He put his failures on the big screen. Look at his record. Patagonia in 2009 and the Bolt controversy that humbled him. The retreat from Masherbrum in 2014. Turning his back on the summit of Annapurna in 2016. He never scrubbed these moments from his history. He embraced them. He understood that in high-stakes alpinism, coming home empty-handed isn't a defeat. It is an essential part of the apprenticeship. Those who roped up with him recall a supernatural stillness. Conrad Anker described it as a Buddhist-like calm. When things got sketchy on the face, Lama never spiked his heart rate. He never shouted. He just executed the next move. Methodical, surgical, dispassionate. Yet back on solid ground, he loved the simple pleasures. He'd bypass the kale smoothies for a plate of Tyrolean speck with spices, happily breaking every rule of the modern athlete's diet. After a brutal expedition, you'd find him devouring a plate of cured meat, washing it down with a cold beer. He understood that life was wider than just the next training block. His philosophy on danger was refreshingly honest. Risk is always there, he would say. What matters is that you are fully committed to your decisions. He never played the hero. He never claimed invincibility. He simply accepted that death was sitting at the table. On April 16, 2019, Howse Peak offered a brutal validation of his worldview. It was a stark reminder that you can have perfect form, perfect fitness, and perfect planning and still not make it home. The mountains are indifferent to our skills. Nature holds the aces, always has, always will. David Lama was only 28, yet he had spent half his existence clinging to the precipice of the world's greatest walls. He fundamentally rewrote the rules of what is possible in alpinism. He ignited a fire in a new generation of climbers. And as we look back, we shouldn't remember him merely as a victim of a tragedy. We should remember him as a man who stared into the void, smiled, and lived every single second on his own absolute terms.